Hi, I'm John Moulis and welcome to the second one of my videos about workplace bullying in the Department of Finance in Canberra in the late 1970s and early to mid 1980s. Now, in my first video I gave you an overview of the situation at Department of Finance. Finance had split from Treasury probably just over a year earlier. The place was mainly in a state of flux, but positions had existed for years. The sections had existed for many years. They were previously part of Treasury, but now they were part of Department of Finance. Anyway, in early 1978, I was getting disillusioned with work. I mean, disillusionment, it wasn't disillusionment so much as just a sort of a loss of grounding in my life, that I had known school for 12 years, 13 years, and there had been structures in place and a routine in place that I had got to know and that served me well. Now I was in the workforce now and earning money, like I told you in the first video, and I thought that was really good. I thought, you know, I'm earning money now and I've got a job and you know, this is the Australian dream. This is life now. And so anyway, January was a hard month. January 1978 was a fair. It wasn't a difficult month, but that was the month where I was always on school holidays up until then. I'd always gone with the family to Foster and Taree and had, say, 4 weeks holiday, sometimes 4 weeks holiday, 3-4 weeks holiday with the family up lying on the beach and just enjoying things. And that year was the first year that I hadn't done that. And each day I was going into work and, you know, the sun was out and everything. And I was thinking about what might have been. I was thinking of, you know, at this stage I could have been lying on the beach with the family. I could have been there with my cousins who I was very close to and having my last vacation, but I didn't. I mean, I was there working in the Canberra Public Service. So anyway, that month of January finished, and by this stage my supervisors in the reproduction room, in the print room, they could see that I was basically losing my way, that my mind was wandering, and I did have a bit of a lecture from one of them saying, you know, look, get your mind back onto the job, you know, and you got a job to do here, and try and show a little bit more enthusiasm. But so anyway, a couple of days after I got that lecture, they put me on higher duties. I was put on higher duties down in the pay office, which was part of the accounting office, it was called then. It was later renamed regional office, but they called it the accounting office then in 1978. I was in the pay office for a few days, stapling remittance advices onto the backs of cheques. You know, they printed the cheques which were sent out, and you had to tear these remittance advices off the cash sheets and staple them onto the back of the cheques, and then they were passed on to somebody else, and somebody else verified them, and then they were put in envelopes and sent out. And I quite liked this because it was a bit of a change, you know, and it was I quite liked the office there, and I asked them if I could stay on higher duties. I was only supposed to be there for a week, I think, but I liked it, so I asked them if I could stay on there. And they said, well, they said to me, look, you can't stay in the pay office, but there's another position in reconciliation section where we can put you in. And I said, okay, I'll do that. So I went into the reconciliation section. They called it Reco. And that seemed to be all right. I was going down to the computer room and splitting microfilm. I mean, the microfilm was on these big rolls, and it had details of presented checks and all this information and unpresented checks, and you rolled them through with a machine with a handle and you cut it. From memory, there were, I think, 6 departments or five departments withdrawing accounts on the Department of Finance. There was Social Security, which nowadays is called Human Services or Centrelink. There was Repatriation Department, which nowadays is called Veterans Affairs. There was the Taxation Office, Australian Taxation Office, Department of Finance itself, and there was one other department. I'm not really sure, but each state had these departments in it, and you had to split the microfilm up. It was all into little cans, and you put labels on the little cans. Social Security was by far the biggest because they had all of the dole checks and disability support pension checks and all of that. And there were 4 people there in each office looking at this on the microfilm viewer to see which checks had been presented. And Sydney was by far the biggest, as you'd expect, being the biggest city in the Commonwealth. Melbourne was second biggest, and that. Of course, nowadays, I'm not really up to speed with the public service anymore, but I would imagine that nowadays, with the computer revolution and all that sort of thing, that all of that would be within a local intranet within the bureaucracy now, that if Centrelink wanted to look up to see whether checks had been presented, they'd look it up. But even that's out of date now when you think about it, because there'd be very few Centrelink payments going out by cheque anymore. It's all direct credit to your bank account. So anyway, I went down the computer room. I was doing this, and there was computer printout. That's another story. Computer printout back then was on these really long, continuous pages. You'd get these big boxes of this really wide paper. Each page was about A3 size and perforated. It was like a big zigzag, and that'd go through the printers back then. And back then, the computers were massive, big things. I mean, the Department of Finance had its computer room there in the basement of the Treasury building. The whole basement was taken up with the computers. Each computer was in one room. They were so big that they had to have one room for each computer and each printer. And anyway, I went down there, and the printout was put in our pigeonhole down there at the computer room, and I'd bring it up to the office and split it with for each department, and I'd put that into an envelope and take it up to registry and send it out. And the dispatch had to be done by, I think, 2 o'clock each day, or it might have been 3 o'clock, I'm not really sure. But anyway, it had to be done by a deadline, and that was it. So, I was there in this job, and I was all right. I mean, I never said anything to anything. I tried to get along there. I didn't say anything inflammatory to anyone, or didn't say anything. But there were early problems with this office. The supervisor, the OIC officer in charge, was a fella named Graham. I mean, I forget what his last name was. but I got along fairly well with him. But I had a bit of problem with the two I see, a fella named Albert Stavarak. Now, you might recognise the name if you're into pop culture, because his daughter appeared on Big Brother in 2008. I think she might have won it, I'm not really sure, but she became a favourite because with the young male viewers, because she was absolutely stunning, and all of the young guys really went for her. But of course, this was 1978. This was years before she was born, and the guy underneath him was a fella named Gary Holmes. Now that's a story in itself. Gary Holmes was an alcoholic and a pedophile. He used to talk about having sex with little schoolgirls all the time, and he was, and he didn't think there was anything wrong with it. He thought that was normal behaviour, and coming to work and boasting about all of his conquests with little schoolgirls and all of that. And everybody else in the office never said anything about it. But I was disgusted by it, I was repelled by it, and I was repelled by him, because he was an alcoholic as well, and that was just another black mark against him. But I never said anything to him at all. I just shut up and did my work, and that. Early on in the piece, the job was advertised in the Gazette. I mean, all the jobs in the public service were advertised in the Commonwealth Gazette on Thursday. Every Thursday it came out, and it was compulsory reading for everybody in the public service. You looked it up, and there were all these jobs within the public service advertised, and you applied for them and all of that. And that job that I was acting in, there in the reconciliation section, that was advertised, and I was told to apply for it, because I wasn't going to be put into it straight away. I mean, the public service doesn't operate like that. To get promotion, you have to apply for promotion. You have to go to interviews in front of a panel, and the panel, there's people there, there's maybe one person from the section that you're in. I think there might be a person from personnel at the department. Of course, nowadays they call it human services, or human resources they call it now, I think. And there's someone from outside the department, maybe from the Public Service Board or something like that. But you had to go before this panel. So anyway, I was told by Graham, the supervisor, that they really wanted me in the job, that because I was a male. I mean, that was the reason. The other applicant for the job was Sue Martin, a girl called Sue Martin, who worked in registry, I think. And but I thought I was home and hosed. I thought that I was going to get the job, because the supervisor said to me that we want an all-male office. We don't want a girl working in the office. I mean, it seems outrageous by today's standards that someone would actually come out and say that, but he did. He said to me, we want you in the job because we want an all-male office. And he said that he was putting in reports about me which were absolutely glowing, which were saying how good I was and everything like that. And I thought I was home and hosed. I thought I was definitely going to get it. Anyway, they held the interviews, and they delayed by almost 2 weeks making a decision. They told me it was because the job was the lowest of lows, basically, and that it was hard to split. It was impossible to split us both, that we were both equally qualified. I mean, even though I'd been acting in the job for a couple of months. Anyway, they finally made a decision, and they gave it to Sue Martin out of seniority, because back then seniority was a factor in public service promotions. She had been in the public service, she had been in the department, I think 7 or 8 months longer than me, and there was a split there. They couldn't make a decision, so they had to go on seniority. And that was a bit of an eye-opener. It was my first rebuff in the public service, and I took it fairly badly. I mean, from that moment on, my behaviour, I became a lot more cynical. My behaviour changed. But what happened was that they did get their all-male office because Sue Martin was put into the pay office. She was put into the job that I was originally acting in the pay office. I mean, that job was still vacant, so they put her in that job, and they let me continue there in reconciliation in that job. And it was probably the worst thing they could have done, because from that moment on, things really did decline badly. Graham left, the OIC left, and Albert Stavarik was put in as the acting boss of reconciliation, and Gary Holmes, the alcoholic pedophile, he was the acting 2IC. And there was frosty relations between Albert and me. I mean, and frosty relations, and what happened is that the alcoholic pedophile, he was sort of zeroing in on me because I was young. I was only 18 years old, and so I was nearly in the generation that he was sexually attracted to. So he was sort of fascinated by my sex life. You know, he really wanted to know all this stuff about my sex life. And I tried to ignore him. You know, I mean, what do you do? How do you handle that? I mean, at school, with the careers advisors, they don't tell you how to deal with people like this in the public service. They don't, in fact, they don't even tell you that there are people like that in the public service. And this guy just kept needling me all the time, Gary Holmes. He kept on demanding to know details about my sex life, about girls I'd had sex with. You know, he'd be going and saying, oh, I bet you've had sex with a lot of little girls. Yeah. You know, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, and all this sort of thing. And Albert, the acting OIC, he just ignored all of this because there was this attitude within the office, this regimented attitude that Albert was a clerk class 5 or acting clerk class 4 or 5, and Gary was a clerk 4. I'm not sure they were called it Clerk 2-3 back then, but I think that Gary was an acting Clerk 4, and that was 3rd Division, and I was 4th Division. I was the lowest of lows, acting CA2. So I couldn't do anything about it. I went to Albert and said that, look, Gary's saying these things to me, I don't like it. And Albert's attitude was basically that he is a clerk class 4, you are a CA2, so suck it up, sister. That was the attitude. Anyway, he kept needling me, and I kept trying to ignore him, and he wasn't going to go away. And he finally said, tell me about the girls, tell me about the girls, tell me about the sex and all this sort of thing. He said, and then he said, you do have sex with girls, don't you? You do like girls, and I just sort of sighed and said nothing to him, and then he jumped to the conclusion that I was gay, that I didn't like girls at all, and that was just the thing which escalated the whole thing to a whole new level. That was when the real bullying really started, the real harassment. Anyway, this is about to run out, so I better wrap this up now, just as it's getting interesting, you're all thinking now. But anyway, this is about to run out now. I've only got a few seconds to go because there is a 20-minute time limit on this. So in the next video, I'll tell you about when the garbage really started, when the bullying and harassment really started. And let me tell you, it was absolutely full on day after day. It was hell. Anyway, goodbye from John. See you.